My name is Rachel Moran and I'm a sex trade survivor, and I've come here to talk today not so much about my own experiences but more about the reasons why I, as a heterosexual woman, have absolutely no respect for men who pay for sex. And by respect I mean on a sexual level, attraction, why that damages my attraction just as a woman, not only as a sex trade survivor, because that's only one part of it. Because I know from my experiences and my friendships and closeness with many women down the years that the concept of a man paying for sex is something that's off-putting on a sexual level, generally, to women. Now, as for me, I got into prostitution from a position of homelessness as a 15-year-old, socially disadvantaged child. And I spent 7 years in that area of life, and I got out at 22. And I learned a lot about men who pay for sex during those 7 years. But I didn't have very much time to think on a political level at that time about what was going on. But I've taught a lot in the 15 years that have passed. So I want to talk about one aspect of that here today. And it's how I feel towards men who pay for sex and what men who pay for sex exude from themselves out into the world around them. And I think that might be best illustrated by giving you a little example, a little story, something that happened to me only about a week ago. I was sitting in a bar in Dublin, having a late night drink with a friend of mine, also a sex trade survivor, and a member of our group, Space International. Space, by the way, stands for Survivors of Prostitution Abuse, Calling for Enlightenment. So we're sitting there and we're having our late night drink, and there's a table fairly near to us with about 5 men, very drunk men, sitting at it. So anyway, Big Ears besides me is earwigging into their conversation, and she overhears what's going on at the next table. So she tells me, and I look over. And what was happening was the tallest, largest, most overweight, most drunken man at the table had decided that he wanted what he described as a whore. So, you know, he'd announced this at the table. I need a whore, lads. I'm going to see a whore. Has any of the phone there? So one of his friends turns around, handed him his mobile, flicked through it, showed him how to find a woman. And so he did. So he said, okay, lads, you know, I'm off to bang the whore and whatever, and out the door he went. And I said to my friend, you know what, I only wish to God I had that girl's phone number. I wish I could let her know who's just about to walk through her door and the condition he's in. Because this man was very drunk. And we, all of us who've lived prostitution, have had that experience far too many times to count. So we were talking about this, and I said to her, you know what, because the men at the table then, they brought up their conversation again. And I said, I need to get out of here to her. I said, I can't listen to this. So I'm going outside to have a cigarette. So I did. And I was out there 5-10 minutes, however long it took me to smoke my cigarette. And I came back in. And I sat down and she said to me, Rachel, I really wish you'd have stayed. I wish you'd have stayed. And I said, why? What the hell did they say? You know, they had, those 4 men who were left at the table had the polar opposite conversation to the one I was expecting. I had left to walk away from all the jeering and the slagging and the dehumanizing women that so often goes on in situations like that. And she relayed their conversation back to me. And the man who had actually handed his phone to this punter had brought up to the other men, you know, the whole concept of prostitution. And they were country lads. And he said, would you do that yourself, lads? I wouldn't do that, no way. And I said, you're having me on. Did he say that? And she said, yeah. So she went through the conversation, and apparently this man had said, sure, if there's no enjoyment for the woman, where's the enjoyment? I wouldn't enjoy that. So they all got into this conversation about the demerits of prostitution and why they wouldn't dream of doing it themselves. Now, I was delighted to hear that. It was a real relief and a welcome change. But it got me thinking, and I was thinking about the way the man who actually brought this up and most strongly condemned it was the same man who'd sourced a woman for this other man on his own phone. So what you need to look at here is you have a situation, 5 men around the table, okay? The statistics tell us that 1 in 15 men in Ireland either does or ever has bought sex. Around this table it was 1 in 5. But the majority, those 4 men, they facilitated it, okay? They condoned it, and they kept their condemnation to themselves in the privacy of their own hearts. As soon as one of them mentioned the fact that he didn't like it, well, then it was okay, they were free to speak. So that got me thinking about the area of feminism I'm involved in, abolitionist feminism. And it got me thinking about the way we really need men on board here. We need men to start speaking up and telling the truth to each other. Because if the majority of men who don't and wouldn't buy sex started speaking the truth to each other, well then it would create a social climate where those who do buy sex understood just how out of order their actions truly are. So that's the one point I'd like to make, and go on from that, I suppose, to explain to you. In my father's day, and I only know this because a man who's around the same age my dad would be if he were still alive, explained to me that there was a phrase often said amongst men, and it was, real men don't pay, okay? With the idea and the understanding that if you have to actually pay in order to get a woman into bed, well then what does that say about your own masculinity? What does it say about your attractiveness to the opposite sex? And that is very true. There is a reason, when you think about it, we can all understand why a man who's just left a brothel is not going to go home and discuss it with his wife, right? That's fairly clear. But what about his sister, or his female cousin, or his niece? You know, there's a reason why men keep this from women, and it's because they understand that it dehumanizes women. Now, I've had some conversations, not all of them very nice, with women in the movement I'm involved in, because a small minority of women want this issue to be about women only, because the vast majority of people harmed by the sex trade are females. Women, but actually usually girls, because when females go into prostitution, they, like myself, usually haven't even hit the age of sexual consent yet. So anyway, some of these conversations, and I haven't had very many of them, they're only a minority of the women involved in this movement, but some of them have wanted us to basically ignore the damage done to men by the sex trade. And I think that if we do that, we are ignoring a very important part of the picture here. Because the reality is that the sex trade damages everybody. And that's leaving aside the fact that there are males and transgendered persons selling sex themselves. I think that if we ignore the fact that the sex trade is damaging to men, we've left out a crucial part of the picture. Because the reality is what I call systems of prostitution, because there is no prostitution proper existing on its own, floating out in the ether somewhere. No. Stripping plays into this. Pornography. All pornography is, as one woman said, pictures of prostitution. I describe pornography as filmed evidence of sexual abuse. I was photographed pornographically when I was very young. I worked in strip, and I know those feelings. They're not dissimilar. They're not different to what happens in prostitution. They're just filtered through your psyche in a different way. So what I want to see is men stepping up here and going back to the type of understanding that men in Ireland had 30 and 40 years ago when they said to each other, real men don't pay. And they said it, when they said it, they meant it, and they understood it. And they understood it as an aspect of their own masculinity. And what I find really interesting is that the sexual revulsion that I feel around a person who will pay for sex and will stand over paying for sex and keep on defending it, there's something, there are a lot of different levels to that, but just as a heterosexual woman, it demotes a man's masculinity in my mind. Anybody who has to open his wallet and reach in and take out cash and hand it over in order to use the body of a woman or a girl like some kind of human masturbation aid, apart from the fact that that's dehumanizing and that's sleazy and all of those other terms you could put on it, which are true and applicable, very much so. Also for me, it does something to reduce his attractiveness on a sexual and masculine level. And what I think I'd love to see men looking into is what exactly it is that women are attracted to in men. Heterosexual women, of course, I'm talking about here. There is a confidence. We all understand the concept that confidence itself is sexy, okay? Confidence in a man. Sexual confidence can't exist in any man who feels he has to buy for sex. and lives that as a routine part of his life. But from a female perspective, when you look at men who pay for sex, there is something pathetic in that. There's something in that that reduces the worth of their masculinity in my eyes because they have no confidence in it. The reality is real men don't pay. Real men don't pay because they know that they don't need to.